My parents didn't even come to my son's funeral. They said they were too busy. But a month later, they showed up at my house, not to comfort me, but to demand my son's $850,000 trust fund to pay for my sister's wedding. That was the day I decided they would regret ever underestimating me. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you most, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is about heartbreak, betrayal, and the sweetest revenge you'll ever hear. Hi, my name is Luna, and this is the story of how my life was destroyed, and how I destroyed them right back. The day my son, Lucas, died, my world shattered. He was only 6 years old, a bright, kind, adventurous little boy who loved dinosaurs and believed every scrape and bruise was a battle scar from his imaginary expeditions. Losing him felt like someone had ripped my soul out and left me hollow. Lucas had been diagnosed with a congenital heart defect when he was born. From the moment he came into this world, every day felt like a miracle. Ryan, my husband, and I dedicated our lives to making sure Lucas felt loved, safe, and happy. There were countless doctor visits, late nights at the hospital, and moments where we feared we'd lose him sooner than we were ready to. But Lucas never let his condition define him. He was pure sunshine, always laughing, always trying to make everyone smile, even when he was hooked up to machines. When he passed, it wasn't sudden. The doctors had warned us his heart wouldn't hold out forever, but nothing could prepare me for that final moment. One second, he was looking at me with those big, trusting eyes, and the next, he was gone. I held him in my arms, rocking him like I used to when he was a baby, whispering promises I knew I couldn't keep. The funeral was small. Ryan's parents flew in immediately. His siblings came too, and a few close friends were there to support us. But my parents? Richard and Catherine? They didn't show up. At first, they made excuses. My mom said the timing was inconvenient because Victoria's wedding planning was in full swing. My dad muttered something about travel being a hassle and how grief is a personal journey. It was like my child's death was just a scheduling conflict to them. I wanted to scream, to demand that they care even a fraction as much as Ryan's family did. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was too broken to fight. Ryan was furious. Luna, they didn't just miss their grandson's funeral, he said the night after we buried Lucas. His voice shook with anger. They chose not to be there. That tells you everything you need to know about them. He was right. Deep down, I knew my parents had always treated Lucas like he was disposable. See, my relationship with my family was complicated, to say the least. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. Victoria, my younger sister, was the golden child. My parents spoiled her relentlessly. While I worked 2 jobs in college, they bought her a brand new car. When I got engaged to Ryan, they barely contributed to our wedding. But when Victoria got engaged to Brandon, they started throwing money around like confetti. Still, I never expected them to turn their backs on my son completely. The days after the funeral were a blur. I barely slept, barely ate. Ryan stayed by my side through it all, holding me when the grief felt unbearable. Slowly, painfully, I started to think about moving forward. Lucas had a trust fund set up by Ryan's late grandfather. It wasn't meant for us. It was meant for Lucas's future. College, maybe a first home someday. It was $850,000, a safety net that represented a future we'd never get to see. Ryan and I decided we'd keep the money where it was, untouched, until we figured out how best to honor Lucas's memory. Maybe we'd start a foundation in his name or donate to heart defect research, something meaningful. Then, 1 month after the funeral, my parents showed up. They didn't call first. They didn't even text. They just knocked on my door like nothing had happened. I opened it, and there they were. Richard and Catherine, dressed impeccably as always, looking like they'd come straight from brunch. "Luna," my mom said with a tight smile. "We need to talk." My chest tightened. "About what?" She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. My dad followed, already looking annoyed, like he was being inconvenienced by me. "It's about Victoria's wedding," my mom said, her voice light, as if she were discussing the weather. We're a bit short on funds, and we know you're holding on to Lucas's trust. We think it would be lovely if some of that money went toward making Victoria's Day truly special. For a second, I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. I'm sorry, what? Richard sighed, like I was being difficult on purpose. You don't need that money anymore, Luna. Lucas is gone. It's just sitting there, gathering dust. Victoria's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event, and family should support family. The room spun. My grief, which had been simmering quietly beneath the surface, ignited into white-hot rage. You didn't come to his funeral, I whispered. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. You didn't even care enough to be there when we said goodbye to him. And now you're here, asking for his money? Catherine waved a manicured hand dismissively. Oh, don't be dramatic. Funerals are just rituals. What matters is moving forward. And this wedding? My voice rose, shaking with fury. Lucas was your grandson, my son. And you couldn't be bothered to grieve him, but you want to profit from his death? Ryan appeared in the doorway, his face a storm of barely contained anger. You need to leave. Now, he said coldly. But my parents didn't budge. Victoria's wedding had to be perfect, they insisted. And if I truly loved my sister, I'd contribute Lucas's trust fund to it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I realized they didn't just see Lucas as less important than Victoria's wedding. They saw me as less important, less loved, less valuable, and suddenly my grief sharpened into something else entirely. A plan began to form in the darkest corners of my mind. If they wanted to play this game, fine. I'd play. But I wouldn't just say no. I'd destroy them piece by piece until they wished they'd never crossed me. The rest of that night was a blur. My parents stormed out after Ryan threatened to call the police, but not before Catherine spat out one last venomous line. You're being selfish, Luna. Lucas is gone. The least you could do is use that money for someone who's still alive. Her words haunted me as I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching Lucas's favorite stuffed dinosaur. I could still smell his little boy scent on it, shampoo, crayons, and something sweet like marshmallows. Ryan sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders. Luna, he said softly, we don't ever have to see them again. They crossed a line today that we can't forgive. But I wasn't ready to cut ties. Not yet, because now I wasn't just a grieving mother. I was a mother on a mission. Growing up, my parents had always manipulated me with guilt. Whenever I didn't bend to their will, they'd call me ungrateful or cold. Victoria never experienced that. She was their perfect little princess. She got designer dresses while I got hand-me-downs. She got lavish birthday parties while mine were family only. I'd swallowed years of resentment, telling myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their approval. But standing at Lucas's grave a few days later, I realized how wrong I'd been. This wasn't just about a wedding or money. This was about my parents' complete disregard for my son's existence, and, by extension, that's when the seed of revenge truly took root. Over the next week, I started gathering information. Ryan was hesitant at first. Luna, I know you're angry. I am too. But revenge won't bring Lucas back. His voice was gentle, but his eyes were full of pain. I turned to him, my voice steady. This isn't about bringing him back, Ryan. This is about making sure they never hurt us, or anyone else, again. They think they can take whatever they want because they've never faced consequences. That ends now. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, what do you need me to do? The first step was to understand just how desperate they were for money. Victoria's wedding was set to be a massive event. Hundreds of guests, a luxury venue, designer gowns, a 5-star caterer. All the things my parents had never given me but had happily given her. Through a mutual friend, I learned that Richard had taken out a sizable loan to cover initial expenses, gambling on the fact that he'd find a way to pay it off later. Translation: they were already drowning. I also learned that Brandon, Victoria's fiancé wasn't exactly the financial golden boy my parents thought he was. On paper, he looked successful. A corporate job, a fancy car. But beneath the surface, he was up to his ears in credit card debt and had a history of reckless spending. If Victoria found out the truth about his finances, there'd be trouble. And if my parents couldn't deliver the lavish wedding they'd promised, there'd be even more trouble. That gave me leverage. The second step was to bait them. I called Catherine a few days later, forcing my voice to sound calm and neutral. "Mom," I said, "I've been thinking about what you asked. About Lucas's trust." Instantly, her tone shifted to fake sweetness. "Oh, darling, I knew you'd come around. Victoria will be so happy. We'll make this wedding unforgettable. Just need some time to figure out how much I can give," I said carefully. "It's a complicated account, and I want to make sure it's done properly." "That's perfectly fine," she gushed, "as long as you understand how important this is to your sister." The irony of her words almost made me laugh. Important? More important than her grandson's funeral, apparently. After I hung up, Ryan looked at me skeptically. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded. If we want to take them down, we need them to think they're winning. The bigger their expectations, the harder they'll fall. For the next 2 weeks, I played the dutiful daughter. I attended wedding planning sessions with Victoria, listening to her drone on about floral arrangements and seating charts. I smiled and nodded while Catherine bragged to the venue manager about how our family spares no expense. I even pretended to be excited when Victoria tried on her custom-made wedding dress, a gown that cost more than my entire wedding to Ryan. It was exhausting, but it gave me insight into just how fragile their world was. Victoria, for all her arrogance, was deeply insecure. She needed this wedding to be perfect, not for love, but for appearances. She wanted to prove to everyone that she'd won at life. Richard, on the other hand, was crumbling under financial pressure. I caught him one night outside the venue, arguing on the phone with someone about overdue payments. His voice was low and strained, and I realized he was on the edge of losing everything. And Catherine? She was too focused on controlling every detail to notice the cracks forming around her. Finally, it was time for step 3, setting the trap. Ryan and I met with our lawyer to ensure Lucas's trust fund was legally protected. That money wasn't going anywhere unless we approved it, and we wouldn't. But my parents didn't need to know that. I began dropping subtle hints in conversations. "Well, transferring large sums takes time," I told Catherine one afternoon. "But don't worry, I think we can get at least $200,000 released before the wedding." Her eyes lit up like fireworks. "Oh, Luna, you don't know how much this means to us. Internally," I smirked. "Oh, I know exactly how much it means. The more hope I gave them, the more reckless they became. Richard signed contracts with vendors he couldn't afford. Catherine booked last-minute upgrades, convinced the money would appear any day now. Even Victoria, who had been somewhat aloof toward me, started calling constantly to gush about her dream wedding. Ryan watched it all unfold with a mix of fascination and concern. "They're digging their own graves," he said one night, shaking his head. "That's the plan," I replied coldly, "and when the moment comes, we'll bury them in it." The week before the wedding, Catherine called me in a panic. "Luna, darling, we need that transfer immediately," she said, her voice trembling. "The venue is threatening to cancel unless we pay the remaining balance today." I feigned concern. "Oh no, that's terrible. I'll call the bank first thing in the morning." "Don't worry, Mom, we'll fix this," she exhaled in relief. "Thank you, Luna. You really are part of this family, even if it doesn't always feel like it." The words stung, not because I believed them, but because they showed just how deep her delusion ran. As I hung up the phone, Ryan squeezed my hand. "This is it, isn't it?" he asked. I nodded slowly, a cold fire burning in my chest. Yes. Tomorrow, they'll finally understand what it feels like to lose everything. The morning of Victoria's wedding dawned bright and perfect, the kind of day brides dream of. The sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, and the air smelled of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. It would have been beautiful, even magical, if it weren't for the storm brewing beneath the surface. Ryan and I were up early. Neither of us had slept much. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple black dress. Not morning attire exactly, but not celebratory either. Ryan straightened his tie, his jaw tight. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. I met his gaze in the mirror. "I've been ready since the day they skipped Lucas's funeral." He nodded, though worry flickered in his eyes. "Just promise me one thing. If at any point this feels like too much, we walk away. Together." I reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "I promise." But today, Ryan, we're going to see this through. When we arrived at the venue, chaos was already underway. The place was extravagant. Crystal chandeliers, cascading flower arrangements, a live string quartet playing softly in the background. Catherine flitted around like a queen bee, directing staff and scolding anyone who wasn't moving fast enough. "Luna!" she exclaimed when she saw me. Her smile was wide but brittle, like porcelain about to crack. "Oh, thank goodness you're here. Did the transfer go through?" "The venue manager has been breathing down my neck all morning." I forced a sympathetic expression. "I haven't heard back yet, Mom. The bank said it might take a few hours." Her face tightened. "A few hours?" "The final payment was due yesterday." "I know," I said calmly. "But these things take time." Richard appeared then, his face flushed and sweaty. He looked like a man on the verge of collapse. "Luna, I don't think you understand," he snapped. "If that payment doesn't go through, they're going to cancel the whole wedding. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that would be? The guests are already arriving." I tilted my head slightly. "Embarrassing? Or revealing?" His eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said smoothly. "Just thinking out loud." Before he could press further, Victoria swept into the room like a vision of perfection. Her dress was breathtaking, layers of silk and lace, a train so long it required 2 attendants to manage. She looked radiant, but her eyes were wild with stress. "Mom!" she shrieked. "The florist says half the centerpieces aren't here yet, and the caterer is threatening to leave if they don't get paid." Catherine rushed to soothe her. "Don't worry, darling. Luna's handling the money." At that, Victoria turned to me, desperation etched across her flawless face. "Please, Luna, tell me you've fixed this." I gave her my most innocent smile. "Oh, Victoria, I'm doing everything I can." Inside, my heart pounded with dark satisfaction. They were dangling by a thread, and I was about to cut it. The ceremony began with only minor hiccups. Guests murmured behind their programs, oblivious to the financial disaster looming just out of sight. The string quartet played, the bridesmaids glided down the aisle, and Brandon stood at the altar looking smug and self-satisfied. As Victoria walked toward him, the crowd sighed in admiration. It was a picture-perfect moment, and it made me sick. When the vows were exchanged, I studied Brandon closely. Beneath his polished exterior, there was a hint of arrogance, even cruelty. He wasn't marrying Victoria for love. He was marrying her for status, for access to my parents' wealth, and he was about to find out just how fragile that wealth really was. After the ceremony, the guests moved to the reception hall. It was lavish. Champagne fountains, a custom ice sculpture, tables draped in silk. The kind of party Lucas would have loved to see, though he never would have been invited. Ryan stood beside me, his hand brushing mine. "Are you sure you want to do this now? You could just walk away, let them implode on their own." "No," I said firmly. "They need to know it was me. They need to understand exactly what they did." He nodded, his expression unreadable. I waited until everyone was seated, their glasses filled, anticipation buzzing in the air. Catherine took the microphone to welcome the guests, her voice syrupy sweet. "Thank you all for joining us to celebrate our beautiful daughter and her new husband," she gushed. "This day has been a dream come true for our family." The applause was warm and polite. And then I stood up. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade, "there's something you all should know before we continue." All eyes turned to me. My heart raced, but my voice was steady. My parents didn't come to my son Lucas's funeral, I began. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. They said they were too busy to honor their grandson. But today they're here, and do you know why? Catherine's face went pale. "Luna, sit down," she hissed. "No," I said louder this time. "They're here because they wanted his trust fund. $850,000 that was meant for Lucas's future. They wanted to steal it. To pay for this wedding." Gasps erupted. Brandon's head snapped toward Victoria, who looked like she'd been slapped. "That's not true!" Richard shouted, standing abruptly. "She's lying." I pulled out my phone and held up the screen. "Really? Because I recorded our conversation. The one where you said, and I quote, 'You don't need that money anymore, Luna. Lucas is gone.'" I pressed play. Richard's voice filled the hall, unmistakable. The room fell into stunned silence. Victoria turned to our parents, her face twisted with rage. "You used my nephew's death to fund my wedding," she screamed. "Victoria, honey, please!" Catherine began. "Don't you dare call me honey," she snapped. "You lied to me." "You lied to everyone!" Brandon, ever the opportunist, seized the moment. "If there's no money, then what the hell am I even doing here?" he spat. The room erupted into chaos. Guests shouted, some hurriedly left, others stayed to gawk at the unfolding disaster. I stood calmly in the center of it all, the eye of the storm. "This is what happens," I said coldly, "when you treat people like they're disposable." Lucas deserved better. I deserved better. And now, everyone knows who you really are. Catherine lunged toward me, her face contorted with fury. "You vindictive little—" Ryan stepped between us, his voice like ice. "Touch her, and you'll regret it." Victoria sobbing now. Ripped off her veil and threw it at Catherine. "You've ruined everything!" I looked at my parents one last time. "No," I said quietly. "You ruined yourselves." Ryan and I walked out hand in hand, leaving the wreckage behind. Outside, the evening air was cool and clean, a stark contrast to the toxic chaos inside. "They'll never recover from this," Ryan said softly. "That's the point," I replied. "Lucas may be gone, but his memory deserves justice. And now they've finally paid the price." But as I glanced back at the venue, watching my family implode, I realized something else. My revenge wasn't over yet. There was still one final move to make, and it would destroy them completely. When Ryan and I got home that night, there was an eerie stillness in the air. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. Not happy. I didn't think happiness was possible without Lucas, but lighter. Like a crushing weight had been lifted from my chest. Ryan closed the door behind us and exhaled deeply, sinking onto the couch. "Luna," he said, rubbing his temples, "I'm proud of you for standing up to them." "But did you see Victoria's face?" She looked completely shattered. "She was part of the problem, Ryan," I said flatly. "She stood by while they treated Lucas like he didn't matter. She watched them dismiss me, belittle me, and still expected me to celebrate her fairy tale wedding. I don't feel sorry for her." He didn't respond, but the crease between his brows deepened. I sank into the armchair across from him, kicking off my heels. My feet throbbed, but my mind was razor sharp. "That was just the beginning," I said quietly. Ryan's head snapped up. "The beginning? Luna, you humiliated them in front of everyone they know. Isn't that enough?" "No," I said, my voice hard as steel. "They wanted to take Lucas's future and use it for their own selfish gain. Tonight they lost face. Tomorrow they'll lose everything else." The next morning, I started making phone calls. First, to the venue manager. I explained, in great detail, how my parents had promised payment from funds that didn't belong to them. The manager was furious. Apparently, Richard had signed a binding contract that made him personally liable for all outstanding costs. Then I contacted the florist, the caterer, and every other vendor who had been stiffed. One by one, I gave them my parents' direct contact information and explained that they'd been lied to. Within hours, Catherine's phone was probably exploding with angry calls. I imagined her trying to smooth things over with that fake sugary voice of hers, and failing spectacularly. By noon, the gossip mill was in full swing. Ryan showed me a Facebook post from one of the wedding guests. OMG, you won't believe what happened at Victoria's wedding last night. Turns out the whole thing was funded with money stolen from her dead nephew's trust. Total meltdown in front of 200 people. Brandon left before the cake was even cut. The comment section was savage. Former friends, business associates, distant relatives, everyone was chiming in with their disgust. Ryan chuckled grimly. This is going viral faster than I expected. I smirked. Good. The more people know, the harder it will be for them to crawl out of this. Around 3 p.m., my phone rang. It was Victoria. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Hello, Victoria, I said evenly. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. Luna, what the hell did you do? My entire life is in ruins. Brandon left me. Half our guests are demanding refunds for travel expenses. I can't even go on Instagram without being attacked. I waited a beat before responding. Do you remember Lucas's last birthday, Victoria? There was silence on the line. You didn't come, I continued. You said you were too busy with work. Mom and Dad didn't come either. It was just me, Ryan, and a handful of friends. Lucas didn't care. He was happy anyway. But I care, Victoria. I care that you all treated him like he didn't matter. And now you know how that feels? Her breath hitched. Luna, please. I didn't know they were going to ask for the trust fund. That wasn't me. Maybe not, I said coldly. But you benefited from it. And you never once stood up for me. Or for Lucas. So don't call me asking for sympathy now. Before she could respond, I hung up. Ryan watched me silently, then said, You didn't have to answer at all. You know. I did, I replied. She needed to hear it from me. No more excuses. 2 days later, the real fallout began. Richard's business, a small but respected accounting firm, started hemorrhaging clients. Word had gotten out about his role in the wedding fiasco, and people no longer trusted him with their finances. Several longtime clients pulled their accounts overnight. Then came the legal trouble. The vendors I'd called banded together and filed a lawsuit for breach of contract. The total amount owed was staggering. Without the trust fund to bail him out, Richard had no way to pay. Ryan read the court notice aloud at breakfast, his tone half shocked, half amused. Looks like your dad's on the hook for almost $300,000. I sipped my coffee calmly. Good. Maybe now he'll understand the value of $1. Catherine wasn't faring much better. She'd built her entire social identity around being a hostess, a leader in the local charity scene. Now she was being blacklisted from every event. Invitations stopped coming. People crossed the street to avoid her at the grocery store. For a woman like Catherine, social exile was a fate worse than death. But the most satisfying part? Brandon. Turns out, my earlier digging into his finances had paid off. I anonymously forwarded his debt records to Victoria and to his employer. 3 days after the wedding, Victoria showed up at my door, mascara smeared, eyes bloodshot. You ruined my life, she screamed. Brandon got fired! His credit cards were maxed out. He was using me to pay his bills. I leaned against the doorframe, unbothered. Better to find out now than after you married him? Her face twisted in fury. You think you're so much better than me, don't you? No, I said softly. I just think Lucas deserved more than the scraps you all gave him. She let out a strangled sob and ran down the driveway. I didn't watch her go. That night, Ryan and I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Do you feel better? He asked cautiously. I considered the question. I feel satisfied, I admitted. But it's not over yet, Ryan groaned. Luna, what else could you possibly want? You've humiliated them publicly, destroyed their reputations, and bankrupted them. What more is there? I turned to him, my voice low and deliberate. They still have the house. His eyes widened. You're not serious. Oh, I'm very serious, I said, a dark smile playing on my lips. That house has been their pride and joy for decades. They've lorded it over me my entire life. Taking it away will be the final nail in their coffin. Ryan shook his head in disbelief. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Yes, I said simply. And tomorrow, we make our move. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. It was the kind of quiet resolve you feel before doing something monumental, something you can't take back. Ryan was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He looked at me warily. Are you sure about this, Luna? Yes, I said firmly. They took so much from me, from us, from Lucas. It's time they finally understood what it feels like to lose everything they've ever valued. Ryan sighed, shaking his head. Just be careful. There's no coming back from this. I know, I replied, a cold determination settling in my chest. Richard and Catherine's house wasn't just a home. It was a symbol. Growing up, I had been constantly reminded that it was theirs, that I would never have what they had unless they allowed it. Every decision they made about my life was framed around that house and their so-called legacy. But legally, that legacy had a flaw. When Ryan and I reviewed some old family documents the week before, we discovered something interesting. Part of the property was actually tied up in a shared family trust. Years ago, my grandparents had included me as a partial beneficiary, something my parents clearly hoped I'd forgotten about. They were wrong. Ryan and I hired a sharp, ruthless attorney. We presented her with all the evidence: my parents' attempt to misappropriate Lucas's trust, their financial mismanagement, and their ongoing debts from the wedding fiasco. The lawyer's face lit up like a shark smelling blood in the water. You have a very strong case, she said, her tone brisk and professional. Given the circumstances, we can force a liquidation of their assets to settle outstanding debts and protect the remaining trust interests, which includes the house. Do it, I said without hesitation. 2 weeks later, my parents were served with court papers. The day they received the notice, Catherine showed up at my door. She didn't look like the immaculate, perfectly composed woman I'd grown up with. Her hair was messy, her clothes wrinkled, her face pale with desperation. Luna, she choked out, gripping the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright. You can't do this to us. That house is all we have left. I met her gaze, my expression cold. Lucas was all I had left, Mom, and you didn't even come to his funeral. Her eyes filled with tears. We made a mistake. No, I cut her off sharply. A mistake is forgetting to call. A mistake is missing a birthday. What you did was deliberate. You chose to value appearances and money over your own grandson. You chose to betray me. Now you live with the consequences. Catherine sank to her knees, sobbing. For a brief moment, a part of me almost felt pity. Almost. Please, Luna, she whispered. We'll be homeless. You'll survive, I said flatly. Just like I had to survive after losing Lucas. Then I closed the door in her face. The court battle was brutal and fast. Richard's crumbling business, the unpaid vendors, and the bad press worked against them at every turn. The judge ruled in my favor, authorizing the sale of their house to cover their debts and secure what remained of the family trust. Within a month, the house was on the market. I didn't buy it myself. That would have been too obvious. But I did arrange for the buyer to be someone who understood the situation and would make sure my parents never set foot on the property again. The day the sold sign went up, I drove past slowly, Ryan in the passenger seat. They're moving out tomorrow, he said quietly. I nodded, watching as Catherine frantically packed boxes on the lawn while Richard argued with movers. For a moment, I felt nothing but pure, unfiltered satisfaction. Ryan glanced at me. Do you feel done now? I exhaled, leaning back in my seat. Yes, For the first time since Lucas died, I finally feel at peace. Victoria never spoke to me again after that. Last I heard, she moved to another city, working a low-paying job and living in a small apartment. Brandon disappeared entirely, which was probably for the best. Richard and Catherine? They ended up renting a tiny condo, a far cry from the sprawling house they once bragged about endlessly. Their social circle evaporated. The charity galas, the dinner parties, the endless attention, gone. They were nobodies now. Sometimes, I wonder if they sit in that little condo staring at the walls and think about Lucas. Think about how different things could have been if they had just shown up when it mattered most. I hope they do. I hope it haunts them every single day. One evening, months later, Ryan and I visited Lucas's grave together. I knelt down, brushing away a few fallen leaves from his headstone. "Hey, baby," I whispered. "Mommy did it. I protected what was yours. They can't hurt you anymore." Ryan wrapped his arms around me as I cried softly. "They'll never understand what they lost," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "But I do, and that's why I'll never forgive them." As we stood there, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold, I felt a bittersweet sense of closure. This wasn't the ending I wanted. I would give anything to have Lucas back. But if he couldn't be here, at least I could honor his memory by making sure those who wronged him paid the ultimate price. And they had. Sometimes revenge isn't about anger. It's about balance, about taking the scales that were tipped so unfairly against you and setting them right again, no matter the cost. And for Lucas, I would pay that cost 1,000 times over. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and share it with someone who loves a good dose of justice. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss another story like this. And let me know in the comments. What's the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen or experienced? I'd love to hear it.